Welcome to the HFY Tales channel. Remember to like and subscribe if you like the story. Enjoy and take care.
Deus. Horizon glided silently through the void, its sleek silver hull reflecting the distant light of a nearby star. Aboard the vessel, George Cross stared at his reflection in the polished window, nerves swirling in his chest. As the ship's cultural specialist, he'd been sent on countless diplomatic missions, but nothing had prepared him for today's encounter. The veli were a relatively new addition to the galactic stage, enigmatic, sensory-driven beings whose language relied on taste and touch. For them, physical interaction wasn't taboo, but a natural part of understanding another's essence. When George had been invited to meet with Tiara, a veli diplomat, he'd accepted with curiosity. Yet now, standing outside her quarters, he wasn't so sure. The doors hissed open, revealing a chamber that seemed alive. The walls glowed faintly, shifting hues as if responding to an unseen rhythm. The air smelled sweet, tinged with a floral undertone that reminded George of Earth's spring meadows. Tiara stood in the center of the room, her luminescent skin shimmering with soft lavender tones. She was stunning, her form a delicate blend of humanoid elegance and alien mystery. Her vine-like appendages rested lightly against her sides, their tips pulsing with faint light. "George Cross," she greeted, her voice melodic and soft. "Thank you for coming. I've been eager to meet you." George smiled, stepping cautiously into the room. "The pleasure is mine, Tiara. Your people's openness to diplomacy is refreshing." Her lips curved into a smile, her luminous eyes studying him intently. "We veli learn through sensation. It is how we connect, how we understand. Today, I hope to understand humans better, through you." George nodded, trying to suppress the heat creeping into his cheeks. "I'll do my best to represent humanity well." She tilted her head, her vine-like appendages curling slightly in what George guessed was curiosity. "Tell me, George, what is it that humans hold as their essence? What do you offer when you wish to share yourself with another?" George blinked, momentarily at a loss. He'd studied their culture extensively, but nothing in the texts had prepared him for such directness. "Our essence, I suppose. It could be our words, our actions. Some might say even our emotions." Tiara leaned closer, her eyes narrowing thoughtfully. "Emotions carried through actions. Fascinating. Among my people, essence is often shared physically, tasted, felt." She paused, her gaze intensifying. "I would like to taste something uniquely human, George. Would you allow this?" His heart raced. "Taste?" he echoed, unsure how to respond. "Yes," she replied, her tone innocent and curious. "To us, taste is the purest form of understanding." George hesitated, feeling the weight of her request. He knew this moment would define their exchange, and perhaps the future of human veli relations. With a deep breath, he prepared to answer. George cleared his throat, his mind racing as he searched for the right response. He had prepared for cultural differences, but hadn't anticipated this level of directness. Tiara's gaze remained unwavering, her expression one of pure curiosity, free from judgment or expectation. "Well," he began hesitantly, "humans don't typically, share in that way. Not in the context you're suggesting, at least." Her head tilted slightly, the lavender hues of her skin deepening. "Ah, I see. Your culture carries taboos regarding such exchanges. Fascinating." She paused, her appendages curling thoughtfully. "But surely, there is something you can offer, something that embodies your essence." George hesitated, realizing that a simple offering of food or a drink might not suffice. Tiara wasn't asking for sustenance. She wanted to connect on a level that was deeply personal for her species. He took a deep breath, his cheeks warming as he made a bold decision. "There is something," he said, his voice steady despite his nerves. "It's intimate by human standards, but if you're truly seeking a part of my essence, it might be what you're looking for." Tiara's eyes brightened, her luminescence shifting to a soft pink, a color George had come to associate with veli excitement. "Intimate? Even better. Among my people, Such exchanges are sacred. George moved to sit across from her on a low, organic bench that seemed to grow from the floor. You need to understand, he said carefully. What I'm offering isn't just a sample of human essence. It's something deeply personal, something that carries meaning. She nodded solemnly, her appendages reaching out slightly, as though to reassure him. I will treat it with the utmost respect, George. You have my word. The next moments passed in a blur. George explained the nature of what he was offering, stumbling over his words as he navigated the delicate subject. To his surprise, Tiara remained completely composed, her expression one of genuine curiosity and intrigue. Fascinating, she said after a moment, her voice almost reverent. Your essence carries the potential for life. Among my people, such a gift would be considered profoundly meaningful. George's pulse quickened as Tiara leaned closer, her appendages brushing lightly against his wrist. Are you certain you wish to share this with me? He hesitated for only a moment before nodding. Yes, if it helps us understand each other, our cultures, our species, then I'm willing. In the privacy of the chamber, the exchange began. Tiara's approach was delicate, her movements careful and deliberate, her vines extended to cradle George's hands, her touch cool and soothing. She observed him closely, her luminous eyes locking onto his with an intensity that made his breath catch. When the moment came, Tiara's actions were nothing short of reverent. She accepted the offering with a grace that surprised George, her expression shifting to one of deep concentration. As her tongue flicked out to taste, her skin glowed brighter, a kaleidoscope of colors swirling across her form. She closed her eyes, her body trembling slightly as she processed the experience. Remarkable, she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. I can feel you, your emotions, your essence. There is strength here, resilience, but also vulnerability. It is unlike anything I have known. George watched her, equal parts fascinated and overwhelmed. Her reaction was unlike anything he'd expected, a mixture of awe and gratitude that seemed to transcend words. Tiara opened her eyes, their iridescent glow meeting his. George, she said softly, this is a gift unlike any I have received. It carries with it the essence of who you are, and I am honored. As the colors of Tiara's skin shifted to a radiant gold, a hue George had never seen before, he realized that this moment had not only bridged the gap between their species, but had also created a connection far deeper than he'd thought possible. And when she leaned forward, her voice filled with quiet wonder, her next words took his breath away. Can you give it again in my mouth? George blinked, his mind stumbling over Tiara's request. Her voice carried no malice, no ulterior motive, only raw curiosity and a sincere desire to connect. The golden glow of her skin illuminated the chamber, adding an ethereal quality to her presence. I'm not sure humans usually do that, George stammered, struggling to find the right words. Her expression shifted slightly, a flicker of disappointment in her luminous eyes. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced with her ever-present curiosity. Is it taboo to share something twice? She asked, leaning closer. George laughed softly despite himself. No, not taboo exactly. It's just not something humans typically repeat in such quick succession. She said, her vines curling thoughtfully around her shoulders. But is it harmful to you? Does it cause you distress? He hesitated, realizing the answer was no. The discomfort he felt wasn't physical, but cultural, a barrier built by centuries of human norms that didn't apply here. Tiara had no malice, no shame in her request. For her, this was simply a way to deepen their understanding of each other. It's not harmful, he admitted, meeting her gaze. But it's intimate. Humans don't usually share this part of themselves so freely. Her glowing skin shifted to a soft pink, a color George now associated with curiosity. Intimacy is not shameful, she said, her voice gentle. Among my people, it is celebrated. To give of oneself, to share openly. That is how we build trust and connection. Your essence is unlike anything I have experienced. It tells me things words cannot. George felt the tension in his chest ease at her sincerity. He realized that this moment wasn't about crossing boundaries, but about understanding, bridging the vast gulf between their species. "All right," he said finally, his voice steady. "If this is how your people connect, then I'll share with you again. But," he paused, searching for the right words, "you have to promise me something." Her head tilted, her glowing skin flickering with soft yellow, a signal of attentive listening. "Anything. Promise me you'll explain to your people that humans aren't as open as the Virelii," he said. "This isn't something we take lightly. It's meaningful for us, something we reserve for moments of trust and connection." Tiara's vines extended toward him, wrapping gently around his wrists. "I promise, George, I will treat this with the respect it deserves, and I will ensure my people understand the depth of what you have given me." The exchange resumed with an air of solemnity, both of them fully aware of the significance of the moment. This time, Tiara approached with even greater care, her movements deliberate and reverent. Her luminous eyes never left his, conveying gratitude and a depth of emotion that George hadn't expected. As she tasted him again, her skin erupted into a cascade of shimmering colors, gold blending with hues of pink, blue, and green. Her vines quivered slightly, and her eyes fluttered shut as if overwhelmed by the experience. "This," she murmured, her voice filled with wonder. "This is more than essence. It carries memories, feelings. It speaks of who you are in ways I cannot describe." George watched her, fascinated by her reaction. He'd never considered his body as something that could communicate so profoundly, but through Tiara's senses, it seemed to become a language all its own. When she finally opened her eyes, they glowed brighter than before, reflecting the swirling colors of her skin. "George," she said softly, "this is a gift I will treasure always. You have shared with me more than I could have hoped for." He felt a warmth spread through his chest at her words, a strange mixture of pride and vulnerability. "I'm glad," he said simply, unsure what else to say. Tiara tilted her head, her gaze thoughtful. "You have given me so much," she said. "It feels wrong to take without offering something in return." George shook his head. "You don't owe me anything, Tiara. This was about understanding, not exchange." "But understanding goes both ways," she said, her vines reaching out to brush lightly against his arm. "If you are willing, I would like to share a part of myself with you." George hesitated, unsure of what she meant. "How would that work?" he asked, his curiosity piqued. Tiara smiled, her luminescent skin glowing warmly. "Our essence is shared through touch," she explained. "It is less physical than yours, but no less meaningful. If you are open to it, I can show you what it means to be Virelii." The idea intrigued him. "What do I need to do?" "Simply allow me to connect with you," she said. "You may feel sensations, emotions, fragments of my being. It will not harm you, I promise." George nodded, his heart racing with anticipation. "All right, I trust you." Tiara's vines extended, wrapping gently around his shoulders and arms. Her touch was cool and soothing, like a breeze on a summer evening. As the connection deepened, George felt a flood of sensations, warmth, light, and a profound sense of belonging. Images flashed in his mind, vast fields of bioluminescent flora, crystalline cities suspended in the sky, and a people who lived in harmony with their world. He felt Tiara's emotions, her unyielding curiosity, her joy at discovering new things, and her quiet longing for connection. When the connection ended, George opened his eyes to find Tiara watching him intently. "Did you feel it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "I did. It was beautiful." Her smile widened, her skin glowing with soft golden hues. "Then we have truly connected, George. We are no longer strangers." George leaned back against the organic bench, his breathing steadying as the glow of the Virelii chamber bathed the space in warm, golden light. Tiara sat beside him, her luminous skin shimmering softly, the colors shifting with her emotions, contentment, curiosity, and something deeper, more complex. The silence between them was gentle, the kind that didn't need to be filled. Her vines rested loosely against her sides, relaxed but still alive, with faint pulses of light. George turned his head to look at her, taking in the delicate, alien elegance of her form. "That was incredible," he murmured, his voice low and genuine. Tiara tilted her head toward him, her glowing eyes meeting his. "It was profound. Your essence is unlike anything I have ever encountered. It carries not just life, but meaning." He chuckled softly, running a hand through his hair. "You make it sound like I'm some sort of cosmic mystery." Her lips curved into a faint smile, her vines brushing lightly against his arm. "To us you are. Humanity itself is a mystery, so full of contradictions, yet so vibrant. I find myself drawn to it, to you." George's chest tightened at her words, and for a moment they simply sat in the quiet glow of the chamber, their connection unspoken but deeply felt. Eventually, Tiara broke the silence, her voice soft but inquisitive. "George, may I ask you something personal?" He nodded, leaning forward slightly. "Of course. What's on your mind?" Her glowing skin dimmed to a contemplative blue. "Humans value individuality above all else, yes. It is at the core of your identity." George smiled faintly. "Yeah, I'd say that's true. We believe in the right to choose our own paths, to shape our own lives. It's not always perfect, but it's part of what makes us human." Her vines curled thoughtfully, her luminous eyes narrowing slightly. "But does this not lead to division, to conflict? Among the Virelii, individuality is celebrated, but always within the framework of the collective. We prioritize harmony above all else." George nodded slowly, sensing the shift in her tone. "I get that, and I think there's a lot humanity could learn from your sense of unity. But I also think individuality drives progress. It pushes us to innovate, to think differently. Without it, we'd stagnate." Her skin flickered with faint traces of violet, curiosity tinged with skepticism. "But at what cost? Your species has waged countless wars, consumed your planet's resources, and driven yourselves to the brink of destruction. Is this the price of your individuality?" George frowned slightly, her words striking a nerve. "You're not wrong. We've made mistakes. Big ones. But those mistakes have taught us valuable lessons. They've forced us to adapt, to grow." Tiara leaned forward, her vines coiling tightly around her arms. "And yet the suffering caused by those mistakes is immeasurable. Among the Virelii, we strive to avoid such harm. The needs of the many outweigh the desires of the few. This ensures balance, stability." George's jaw tightened as he considered her perspective. "I can see the value in that, but doesn't it come at a cost? What about the voices that get silenced because they don't fit into the collective? What about the people who are forced to conform?" Her skin darkened slightly, the gold hues fading to a muted gray. "We do not silence anyone, George. Every voice is heard, every individual is valued. But the collective must always come first. Without it, we would fall into chaos." George shook his head, his frustration bubbling beneath the surface. "But chaos isn't always a bad thing. It's messy, sure, but it's also where creativity happens. Some of humanity's greatest achievements have come from people who dared to challenge the norm, to think outside the collective." Tiara's vines unfurled, their tips glowing faintly as her posture stiffened. "And how many lives were lost in pursuit of those achievements? How many suffered so that a few could succeed?" George leaned forward, his voice rising slightly. "I'm not saying it's perfect, but isn't that part of evolving? We learn from our mistakes, from our conflicts. That's what makes us stronger." Her glowing eyes narrowed, her tone sharp. "Strength born from suffering. That is not evolution, George. That is recklessness." The air between them grew tense, the gentle intimacy, from earlier giving way to a clash of ideologies. George exhaled deeply, forcing himself to calm down. "Look, I get where you're coming from, Tiara. But humanity isn't the Virelii. We're different, and that's okay. It doesn't mean one way is better than the other. It just means we have different strengths." Tiara's expression softened slightly, though her vines remained taut. "Perhaps, but it is difficult for me to understand how you can accept such chaos. To us, it seems wasteful." George ran a hand through his hair, his voice softening. And to us, your unity can feel stifling. But maybe that's why this is so important. You and me, talking like this, trying to see things from each other's perspective. That's how we grow, together. The tension eased as Tiara leaned back, her glowing skin shifting to a contemplative blue. Perhaps you are right. Differences need not divide us. They can strengthen us, if we allow them to. George smiled faintly, the warmth returning to his voice. Exactly. We're not always going to agree, but that's okay. It's about finding common ground, learning from each other. Her vines extended tentatively, brushing lightly against his arm. You continue to surprise me, George. Your perspective, while alien to me, carries merit. Perhaps there is more we can teach each other than I first imagined. He clasped her vine gently, his smile widening. And maybe we're not so different after all. As they sat together in the dim glow of the chamber, the weight of their argument gave way to a quiet understanding. Their connection was fragile, but growing, a bridge between two worlds. And as Tiara's skin brightened to a soft golden hue, she asked, "Do you think your people are ready to embrace such differences?" George met her gaze, determination sparking in his eyes. "I think we're ready to try." The chamber was quiet again, the tension from their argument slowly dissipating as they sat side by side. The Vareli eye walls glowed faintly, their bioluminescence reflecting the soft hues of Tiara's mood, contemplative blues mingling with streaks of tentative gold. George could feel her vines brushing lightly against his arm, a gesture of peace and reconciliation. "You know," he said softly, breaking the silence, "we might not always see eye to eye, but I think that's what makes this us interesting. It's the differences that keep things exciting." Tiara turned to him, her glowing eyes studying his face with a quiet intensity. "Exciting," she echoed, her tone thoughtful. "Your willingness to engage, even when we disagree, is something I find compelling." George smiled faintly, his earlier frustration melting away. "I guess that's humanity for you. Stubborn, passionate, maybe even a little reckless, but always ready to find a way forward." Her vines coiled gently around his wrist, her touch cool and soothing. "And yet, it is that very passion that draws me to you, George. I find myself curious, eager to understand more." Her words hung in the air, charged with unspoken meaning. George's pulse quickened as Tiara leaned closer, her glowing skin shifting to warm, golden hues. Her proximity was intoxicating, her scent a subtle blend of floral sweetness and something uniquely alien. "Tiara," he murmured, his voice low, "are you sure about this?" Her vines brushed lightly against his cheek, her touch feather soft. "I am. Connection is at the heart of who we are, George. And with you. Ifel sumazingdape." George hesitated for only a moment before leaning in, their faces inches apart. Her lips parted slightly, and he felt the faint warmth of her breath as their gazes locked. Slowly, he closed the distance, their lips meeting in a kiss that was both tender and electrifying. Tiara's response was immediate, her vines curling around his shoulders as she pressed closer. Her luminescent skin brightened, golden hues shimmering with streaks of vibrant pink. Her touch was both delicate and deliberate, her hands exploring his face and shoulders as though memorizing every detail. As their kiss deepened, George felt a rush of sensations, soft, cool vines wrapping around his arms, the warmth of her glowing skin against his, and the faint hum of the chamber responding to their energy. Tiara's movements were fluid and precise, guided by a blend of curiosity and instinct. Her hands traveled to his chest, her touch firm yet gentle. "Your body is fascinating," she murmured, her voice tinged with awe. "So warm, so alive." George chuckled softly, his own hands tracing the elegant contours of her shoulders. "You're not so bad yourself. There's something mesmerizing about you." Her glowing eyes narrowed slightly, a playful glint in their depths. "Mesmerizing? I am pleased to hear that." Her vines unraveled, brushing against his back and sides as she leaned closer. The sensations were unlike anything George had ever experienced, soft, cool, and strangely intimate. Tiara's exploration was careful but eager, her curiosity driving her movements as she sought to understand every part of him. George's breath hitched as her hand slid lower, her touch sending a shiver through him. She paused, her gaze meeting his as if seeking permission. He nodded, his trust in her absolute. "George," she murmured, her voice low and filled with emotion. "You are remarkable." The next moments were a blur of sensations and emotions, their connection deepening with every touch, every kiss. Tiara's vines entwined with his body, their gentle pressure grounding him even as her luminescent skin seemed to pulse with the rhythm of their shared heartbeat. She guided him with a grace that was both alien and achingly familiar, her movements fluid and deliberate, her breathing quickened as their bodies moved together, her glowing skin shifting through vibrant hues of gold, pink, and violet, a kaleidoscope of emotions playing out in real time. George was overwhelmed, not just by the physicality of their union, but by the profound sense of connection he felt with her. It was as though their very beings were intertwined, their differences melting away in the heat of the moment. "You're incredible," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. Tiara's gaze softened, her vines brushing lightly against his cheek. "And you, George, you are unlike anyone I have ever known." As they reached the height of their intimacy, the chamber seemed to come alive around them. The walls glowed brighter, the soft hum of the veli energy resonating with their shared rhythm. Tiara's skin pulsed with golden light, her expression one of pure ecstasy. George felt his own body respond, his heart pounding as he lost himself in the moment. There was no hesitation, no doubt, only the unspoken understanding that this was more than just a physical act. It was a merging of two worlds, a bridge between two beings seeking connection in a universe that often felt too vast. When it was over, they collapsed together on the bench, their breathing ragged but synchronized. Tiara's vines remained entwined with his arms, her glowing skin dimming to a soft, contented gold. They lay in silence for a long time, the weight of the moment settling over them. George traced lazy patterns on her shoulder, marveling at the smooth texture of her skin. Tiara rested her head against his chest, her breathing steady and calm. "That was beyond words," she said finally, her voice a whisper. George chuckled, pressing a gentle kiss to her hair. "Yeah, I don't think any language could do it justice." She tilted her head to look up at him, her glowing eyes filled with warmth. "You continue to surprise me, George. With every moment, you teach me more about your kind, and about myself." He smiled, his heart swelling at her words. "The feeling's mutual. You've shown me a whole new way of looking at the universe." As they lay together in the quiet glow of the chamber, George felt a profound sense of peace. But beneath that peace lingered the knowledge that their journey was far from over. There were still challenges to face, questions to answer, and bridges to build. And as Tiara's vines tightened gently around his arm, her voice a soft murmur against his chest, she asked, "What happens now, George? Where do we go from here?" He didn't have an answer, but he knew one thing for certain. Whatever came next, they would face it together and keep learning from each other's culture.